Hi, and welcome to the FX Podcast. I'm John Montgomery. Today, we're diving into the visual effects of Tron Ares, the latest chapter in the iconic Tron franchise. And joining us is David Seeger, Head of Department Production Visual Effects Supervisor for the film. He's from ILM, but was effectively on loan as the overall supervisor for the project. Now, in the conversation, David talks about balancing the minimalist design language of the original Tron with today's expectations for visual complexity, the challenges of bringing the light cycle chase into the real world, and how ILM's team tackled everything from bioluminescent grid water to the retro-styled digital world sequences. Now, if you're listening to the FX podcast, you should check out our YouTube version, which has behind-the-scenes footage and more. It's a fascinating deep dive into both the art and technology behind the film, so let's go ahead and cross that conversation now.
So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, there was a lot of interesting challenges in this film. In particular, I thought there were two that really came to mind when I was thinking about it. Firstly is naturally in any film that has part of a franchise or a legacy, you've got a visual design language. Though the second part of that is that the visual design language of Tron has always been incredibly minimal in a sense, right? It's like a product of both its age and the specific design. And yet an audience today isn't going to buy a lack of visual detail so much. I was just wondering, did that figure much in your thinking at the start of the project?
Well, yes. I mean, ultimately, I mean, in the broad scope, like as you say, when you're taking on a film that is the third in a series and a series that is held in such high regard visually for very different reasons, separated by the decades between the original and Tron Legacy. So that very much played into a lot of our decision making. A big part for our film obviously takes place in the real world in modern day, and for that work, Darren Guilford returns as production designer, bringing from Tron Legacy, bringing with him all of that amazing design language of that film. So there, we I think all collectively wanted to really embrace that Tron Ares was, had direct kind of lineage to Tron Legacy. That it felt like an extension of that, and that definitely applies to the more to our modern, to our Dillinger grid and our NCOM grid. But yeah, no, really wanting to just feel that, that they were cousins, as it were. The Tron Legacy, obviously primarily takes place inside the grid, but that our work was a natural extension of that. And really, a lot of the work beyond that was in trying to translate that to like, okay, now what does that mean? We like the motifs, light lines and the silhouettes and the wheel design and all these different types of things. How do we make that feel like it belongs in the real world, that it's not just something copied out of like a computer and pasted into the real world?
Okay, I was going to say if we could unpack two things to
Mm-hmm.
illustrate that. I think one is the bike race in the
Mm-hmm.
city, and
Yeah.
then the other is the I'm going to call it the water race. I know it's kind of like grid
Yep.
water, but we'll get to that. But
Yep.
the water chase, right?
Yeah.
And I think those two things really hit at this because in one case, if you just take straight computer graphics with the graphics look and put it
Mm-hmm.
in the city, I'm
Yeah.
going to sit there thinking it's pasted on top. I mean, obviously
Exactly.
it didn't. And
Mm.
in the other, there was this kind of real complexity with water that had to be solved inside the Tron. I was wondering if we could just compare and contrast those two, maybe
Yeah.
starting with the city.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, when you say, hey, let's make a Tron movie where, you know, elements of Tron are coming to the real world, top of the list is a light cycle chase in the city. Like everyone knew we were going to have this amazing light cycle chase throughout the city. So it had always been a big part of the script, and really, the desire was to make it feel real, like, and I'm not just talking like good compositing, just really this sense of like, that you're just standing on the street and a light cycle just drove by you, just this like, kind of sensibility. And for us, the key to that everyone embraced from the director on down was really um, being mindful of the magic, as it were. Like we don't want to just like have everything be super powered and faster than normal and shinier than normal. Just being very intentional with what was meant to feel real and what was meant to be somewhat spectacular. An example of that would be if you look at the light cycle compared to the light cycle of Tron Legacy. Our light cycle has more panel lines, has bolts, has carbon fiber parts, has brushed aluminum, has it has all these things that we have direct correlations to real world because we want to feel as if Dillinger Corporation is ready to print these as if they're real things. And you'll notice that the light cycle prints into the real world where Tron language is that light cycles are created from baton, and that was Yoakum, the director from day one, was like, no, I don't want that. That makes it that's an example of crossing that line of now that's too magical of like just light lines. That's for the grid. Where in the real world, it's a bike that was printed. Where we cross that line is where we still need light walls. We still need to have a light wall that's generated that is somewhat science fiction kind of a thing, and for that to exist. But
because
so
there's a
really,
duality there, isn't there? Because the
mm,
bike has to be of the world because it's A, it's printed, but B,
yeah,
if it isn't, then when it's sort of hitting with buses and cop cars and
hmm
stuff, if it's magical, it doesn't feel like there's any real kind of contact. But the
yeah,
flip side of that is the light walls are the things that do the cutting of the cop cars
yeah.
and stuff, and they're not like a sort of a printed device.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that was just that I think like I said it was about being intentional when we crossed that line. And that was the walls were one both in the flying jets later and some of those kind of things, how the super recognizer flies at the end. Like there's a couple things where you can sit there and go, okay, wait, how does that really work? It is a science fiction film after all, but just trying to keep as much grounded as possible, build that foundation so that when you see the light cycle chase that it feels more grounded in reality. A big part of that was us shooting it as real as possible. We bought and modified electric bikes, put lights on them, and once that was kind of done, we were shooting them as if we were shooting a spy movie. Or something. Like it was just like we were just out there at night, shooting traditional methods. And really that to me is one of the big keys to the final result is that the foundation is one that audiences cinematically are accustomed to. There's all those, we've all seen lots of car chases and all those kind of things is like we wanted to build a foundation of familiarity of like how those things are shot and everything. And then really our work at the end was largely like, okay, well, let's replace that Harley Davidson electric bike with our light cycle, in the end.
And so, if you're bringing physicality to a very, very well understood CG element, if we contrast that with the
Mhm.
water, we're now bringing a physical element into what
Yeah.
has been an area where I didn't think anyone even sweated before, yet alone had like
Yeah. Yeah.
water.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, that was our skimmer chase, what we called our light skimmer chase. The aquatic chase scene inside the Dillinger grid was that's our grid version of like just going full normal Tron, kind of aesthetic. So that world is a world that fits, I think, very much within the Tron legacy aesthetic. The kind of dark, there's the atmospheric clouds up above and those kind of things. The skimmer chase was just a fun idea of um yeah, it's obviously you have your light cycles, okay, well what if we went and explored this skimmer, this kind of a jet ski almost as you can imagine it. And it kind of grew out of that. And really the water was one that there is some water at the very end of Legacy, but that they fly over there at
Okay.
the end. But for ours, it played a lot heavier. And there was a handful of things we, again, our ideas were always I think Legacy really introduced the idea where there were clouds in Legacy, and that and it's like and there were these like kind of Tetris shaped clouds in the original 1982 film, but Tron Legacy had like actual volumetric looking clouds, and I always looked at that as computer technology has gotten better, so the simulation inside the real world has advanced. So like to me there's even like rain happening in Legacy, there's moisture throughout, so ours was really kind of an extension of that, saying like, okay, well, same kind of thing is like the computer simulation of this world is this Dillinger facility is this hub of industry and military, kind of manufacturing that it's almost like it's like a Long Beach harbor, kind of a thing of these things coming and going, and then they're just escaping through it. So the water we always thought is like that's just the computers best representation of that water. And then as we got into it, we were like, okay, we got to introduce light lines or grid lines into the water. It's just a classic, and that was a fun thing to try to figure out. Like, okay, well then if it's water, how do you have grid lines on the water? And then beyond that, like Joachim fell in love with, and he would just send me reference of these hydroplane boats with these massive rooster tails of water that get spit up behind those hydroplane racing boats. And he's like, this is what I want. And so that became a big aesthetic of the skimmer flying through and just kicking up this big tail of water. And then, we did want a version, and then we're like, oh, it looks too normal. So then we started playing with this kind of bioluminescent idea. And so you say like, okay, well, let's have it be kind of lit up, and bright. So give it some kind of Tron magic to it, that aspect. And then, really, Joachim's idea was always that the water was made up of little voxels, little cubes of water. And that can be best demonstrated. You can see it throughout in the sequence. There's the one shot that's on the nose where Eve reaches down and grabs water spray, and it's in her hands, and it's a bunch of cubes. But the ILM team in Sydney did that work, and they worked out these beautifully subtle drops on the lens. And if you look for it, the drops on the lenses are square, like they're square water droplets that hit the lens, and like just those kind of little subtleties, just kind of like it's water and it's a drop on the lens, like you understand it, or a drop in a hand, but then we just add a little bit of squareness. Or when they're underwater and the bubbles are going by underwater, the bubbles are square, so you can see those little kind of things. So it was a way to always be like, if you squint at it, it has a strong foundation in reality, but as you look at it in focus, you see all these other little details where we've added these kind of like digital flourishes throughout.
Yeah, it's Tron water, which is why they don't get wet when they're on the bike,
Yeah,
right? It's like it's Tron
yeah,
water. But
yeah.
but there's two things that like the complexity of that from a sim point of view is quite severe. But the
Oh yeah.
bioluminescence, I think that's often wouldn't be sort of thought of as being particularly, okay, it's bioluminescent. We sort of know what that
Mhm.
is in the real world. But getting that out of a renderer that looks really
Yeah.
good is actually quite hard, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely was, and we went through a handful of iterations there because we didn't want it to be confused with a light wall,
Mm.
because when you leave a light, in Tron language, you have vehicles that leave bright things behind you. It's kind of, gets into light wall territory. So we played with it as kind of a, I mean, there was no hard and fast rules, but the loose rules were based on like the velocity of the water and those types of things, and wanting the core of it. And then you can actually see, which is a nice subtle little effect, as the skimmer goes over the grid lines in the water, they kind of get activated and they kind of like light up. So you get this. It's great because it gives you a kind of a telephone polling of as they go by, that it ignites the grid lines in the water with the light as well. But no, that was both simulation wise and render wise, a very intensive sequence, for sure. Yeah, especially they go through the tunnel later and the water splashes up on the walls and everything. So yeah, it was quite intense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a great sequence. And of course, you're looking for that originality, but familiarity, which is like, I think
Exactly.
what you really hit there, which is really good. The layout there, though, I understand the actual layout of the environment. You mentioned it looking like a harbor, but I also got, I think, from talking to some of the guys, that there was an idea of it being like a motherboard, like a
Yes.
layout. Can you sort of speak to that?
Yeah, I think that was Darren again, the production designer. One of his overall driving aesthetics for the Dillinger Grid was that he wanted it to feel like a circuit board, like a graphics card or a motherboard of a computer. That if you just shove a camera really close on these graphics cards and the angles, and you can actually see it in the light line design, is very akin to the circuit board lines, the kind of 45-degree angle, like very angular kind of lines. So yeah, that was a big part of that, and that was always part of his from his early designs. That was something Darren was keen to represent, and then we just had to kind of expand upon that. And then, as with any kind of big chase scene, you get into this kind of chicken and the egg of like designing your environment, but then you have your chase scenes. So we ended up having to make the world somewhat modular to be able to handle the shots, so that we could just arbitrarily be driving. Or it's like, okay, the director's like, I want to drive through a narrow part now, or a wide open part, or whatever. That we could just kind of take our world that we've built these pieces and kind of lay them out and to accommodate the needs of the sequence.
So as I understand it, you guys did use StageCraft, but I'm
Mhm.
thinking, did you actually use StageCraft for the bike and the boat, or was it more?
No.
Yeah. So that
Yeah,
was
no.
interesting. Why not? I guess.
So I think on the I'll start on the skimmer side of it. It's one of those things where when you look at it, one with a chase scene like that that's very intricate and has all these high, uh these key story elements, the animation of the sequence wasn't done yet. Like we hadn't edited the scene to know like, oh, and
Right.
then they go through this part and that part late, and you would have had, so it kind of puts the reliance on like having to almost final the animation of the scene prior to shooting, which in prep and production is like you're so far for, you have previs, but it's still just previs. You don't have the final
Sure.
answers. So there's that. And then probably the bigger thing was we already knew we were going to have to add all this water, and the water spray all over the place. So, it's a matter of we knew we were going to have to touch those shots again in post production. So, in the holy grail of stagecraft and LED work, you're often looking for those in camera finals. So, we just knew our hit rate on in camera finals was going to be quite low, and it was going to force us to have to, finalize a lot of those designs. So, it was
So
really
so
just
when they're
determined.
on the craft, what
Mhm.
is what is like how much of them like is that against blue or
That's
is
blue.
that
Yeah, it's blue screen.
okay? And
Yeah.
and costumes wise, with that digital
Yeah,
costumes?
they were in costume. They were in full costume. We had a
Okay.
portion of the skimmer built on a gimbal, and they were on a blue screen. They were in costume, and then Jeff Cronenworth, the DP, felt confident, and I think it is. We just kind of more traditionally lit them, so we just have like them moving through pools of light, type of a thing. So yeah, it was really just. There are some of the skimmer was all blue screen. There are a handful of light cycle shots that are close-up shots on the characters that were shot on the LED, but just a small. And again, it's only the ones where you're really close and you're shooting up into the LED. The minute you go wider and you start to see the road and some of those types of things, it started to break apart. But no, the stagecraft for the most part was we have a big mountain up in the mountains. This big mountain scene in the snow, that set was a stagecraft, the kind of horseshoe big stage. We had two purpose built pop-ups that we did for the offices. So Dillinger's office, where he has his big desk, and he's got these louvered windows behind him looking down into the what we called the transfer bay. That was a pop-up LED. And
And Gillian
the
Armstrong, she posted on social media that she loved
oh
that,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
I'm not into like actor things in terms of gossip, but I just thought it was
yeah,
really interesting that she
yeah,
responded as an actress to that
yeah.
environment.
Yeah, because it's there and it's real, and you look out the window and it's the transfer bay, and
Yeah.
it's not just this blue thing. So yeah, that we had that one, and then the 60, what we call the 61st floor, where it's the NCOM office, where there's the Flynn Museum, the little that they go, and there's a scene there. That scene we built a purpose-built pop-up as well, quite large one, that we did stagecraft work there for as well. And then we did a handful of the car, like there's scenes inside the van and they're driving and talking, and in a car talking. There was work that was done with LEDs for that as well.
For the office that's up on the over at
Hmm.
61st,
Hmm.
that would have, I imagine, worked well, not just for what it gave to actors, but just there were so many reflective surfaces in that
Absolutely.
office.
Yeah, absolutely. And water. We turned on
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
sprinklers.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because from day one, I was like, "Oh yeah." I kept saying, because it was a big LED, and they're like, "Okay, what's the benefits to this?" It's the cost benefit analysis everyone always looks at, right? And that one, we knew we could have a high success, chances for high success rate of in camera finals, which we did get a good many of. But to your point, all the you're looking through multiple layers of glass. Some of those layers of glass are curved. The tables have all these shiny surfaces, and then you add to that at the very end of the scene, we turn on the sprinklers and water's coming down. And I honestly think like blue screen, you're struggling to get all the
Yeah.
reflections off all those surfaces and all those types of things as well. So yeah, no, it really it's nice when you do have those LEDs that, like, when it's a blue screen set, you're, as visual effects, you're often fighting with what's glass and what's not glass on a set as far as the reflection, having to almost like damage control on reflections. But when you had the LEDs up, it was just like, go for it. Like, just let's have fun. Let's put the curved glass and all the, I mean, we still had issues with, camera reflections and those kind of things we had to deal with every once in a while. But you get all these wins like a
I was going to
million
say,
little
yeah.
wins.
For
Yeah,
the if I was thinking about it from a compositing point of view, I'd much prefer to take out the odd reflection of a camera
exactly,
and put in all the faceted
exactly.
and getting those glints that really sell it as well.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
so that worked really, really well. Hey, can I just talk about some more
Hmm.
technical stuff?
Yeah,
So
please do.
the one of the things that's really distinctive in this film is the idea of this sort of 3D printing with lasers.
Yeah.
Um, and what I found really interesting when I was doing a bit of research to talk to you today is like the lasers actually ended up. I mean, because of course you can simulate motion blur, and of course you can
Hmm.
accurately do that. But you'd actually ended up having to turn what was a laser, effectively line, into a
Hmm.
ribbon. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely the fans. We looked a lot
Yeah.
of like concert footage, where they have like laser light shows, and they just kind of have a laser there's as I understand it, and there's a laser that's just, being rotated back and forth very rapidly. So it creates this fan. And what we looked at a lot was like when that happens in a smoky room, that you get this kind of like almost like lava lamp kind of smoke,
Yeah.
cloud tank kind of cross sections of the smoke in
80s
there.
music videos, yes.
Exactly that. Yeah, and or what's the classic beginning of Aliens, like when the lasers cut through, like in Cameron's Aliens. Um, we looked at a lot of that reference, so we wanted to be true to that. I mean, lasers are heavily part of the language of things going to the grid. Back to the original film. Of when Flynn gets shot in the back by the laser and freezes, and the laser just kind of like dissects him and pulls him in. So we knew we wanted lasers to be a part of it. But going back to Yoakum's ideas of like wanting this, technology to feel as grounded as possible, we really just started to riff on these ideas of making this feel industrial, making it feel, I don't want to say dirty, but just, it's he Dillinger's no longer, he's not making video games. He's trying to make, he's what are the military industrial complex. Like he's trying to make like tanks and like sell to the army, those types of things. So it's we wanted we wanted it to be frenetic, um, smoke, like when you see spot welding of robots, like the kind of like pop, pop, pop of sparks kind of going out. So it really just kind of kept riffing off of these ideas of like, well, we know we want lasers, we want it to feel industrial, we want this kind of frenetic energy to it. And then we just started looking at 3D printing technology. And it's funny, it was actually the art department employed an art director that did a lot of 3D printing work as we were helping to finalize designs. And we were literally in the art department and just looked over. And as you 3D print things, they have this kind of supporting lattice structure that helps support the object as it's getting printed, and then you peel that stuff away to reveal
Yeah.
the final object. And it was one of those happy accidents of us in a meeting going like, well, there was one sitting on the side or something like that. We're like, well, what if we did that? What if we surrounded everything and it became this natural? It just felt so natural to tie in all those ideas, and it also story wise, it just gives us a lot of great little reveal moments of
Yeah, the
like almost like a
reveals are
curtain.
terrific. Yeah.
Yeah,
But also just the idea of like a byproduct of waste,
yeah,
like, and these are the baddies, right? So like having
yeah,
waste and just having kind of dust
yeah,
and
yeah,
dirt, it all added. Yeah, I thought it was really, really clever
yeah.
solution.
It was a lot of fun.
The other thing I was wanting to ask you about is there are a bunch of shots where we have the characters from the digital world appearing in the real world. And they have sometimes opaque masks, but sometimes they have transparent masks.
Mm.
And I'm guessing that, like most films, there was work to put in glass in front of their
Yep,
faces. I mean, yeah.
yep,
So
yeah,
was
yeah. So it was as far as storytelling wise, that was really kind of from the top as far as like who had what color mask and what level of density of tint and everything. There were lots of tests and where they landed. As far as shooting techniques, um, basically anything on a blue screen stage, we shot without visors, and then we added them later. Anything on an LED stage, we shot with the visors. So back to that 61st floor when Athena crashes in and she's walking around the set, she had the visor on because it was pretty much,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, she was surrounded. So all those reflections and everything were real. On location, obviously anything we kept the visors in, but for we added a lot of visors. There was also a scene where we ended up originally scripted, Ares didn't have a helmet on, and they decided in post they wanted to have a helmet on Ares. So there's a handful of scenes where we had to go and add helmets to Ares for the entire scene, which obviously it has the helmet as well, with the
I
visor as well.
presume you had to make like a digital Ares to get the
Oh
lighting
yeah,
and stuff working. Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We had a digital Ares for both digi doubles for most of our cast, just for typical stunt performance. When we needed something, for the case of the light cycle chase or the skimmer chase or any of those types of things, when we're replacing for the wide shots, or if we are like in the case of the light cycle chase, it was just a stunt rider on a electric bike, and we needed to replace them. So we have a digital Ares or a digital Eve or a digital Athena to go with that. Ares had Ares had probably the highest level of work needed for digi double work, and that includes face replacements. For some of the stunt work, especially in Act 3, where he's doing a lot of that stunt work. We needed to do face replacement work there as well.
You had some interesting face work to do, the MCP, the discussions
Mm-hmm.
with the version
Mm-hmm.
from the real world
Yeah,
when Ares is talking. And that felt like to me like somebody would have been, I mean, I just imagine this, right? Somebody would have been, we can make this much more realistic. And someone's going, no, 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 it can't be totally
yeah,
realistic. Otherwise we lose
yeah,
the plot. It was almost like ILM working with one hand tied behind its back. I was like,
yeah,
you could have made this way better. I know you could. Not
yeah,
better. I mean, just
yeah,
more, tactile. Yeah.
yeah. It was that's one of those cases where um, the art department did their first go at exploration of what could that Dillinger hologram look like, and I don't want to say they nailed it. Like the very early versions looked great, and everyone fell in love with them. And what you see in the film is almost identical to that very first version. So it's one of those cases where at times it's a struggle in visual effects in post where a design didn't get there during production, and while you're in post trying to execute shots, you're also trying to finalize or find a new look, as it were. This is a case where um, the look was beloved. There was some exploration ideas where people were like, well, what if we did this? And what if we did that? But it was, again, one of those classic of like, we tried these things and then we looked at the original artwork and we're like, you know what? They had something going there and we just steered right back to it. And it's great. It's meant to be, it is Evan Peters' face. We did base it on his scan. There is also this level of wanting it to be subtly skull-like, that
Yeah.
you don't see eyeballs, and like there's aspects of and so probably the most of our work was writing that balance between skull and face
Well,
and
of course, the
anatomy.
audio was also heavily distorted, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there was this. I mean, it wasn't meant to be him. It was meant to
yeah,
be
yeah,
a cloaked version of him. Yeah.
yeah. It's also a fun. Evan played Dillinger in the real world, very animated. And he's yelling at Ares, and he says, "Ah," and he's all these kind of things, and so it's a fun little uh, two-sided coin that when you go to the grid of the hologram talking, that it's just completely emotionless. Like, so it's as if it's almost like a voice to text of like the text coming through that he's outside yelling, but the face is there. So I thought that was because there was a point where we were wondering if we were going to take the face hologram as like you know
Oh, from the
energetic
performance,
and
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like really, but like the performance we have there is driven by, like, we did a facial capture with Evan, and Evan, while he did the lines, he did them basically in a different flavor. So like
Yeah.
on set, it was the like really like animated, like I'm gonna take over the world kind of guy, and then the hologram was very like flat, kind of computer simulation.
Which I liked actually because it made him seem much more desperate when you cut back to the real
Yeah,
world, but like
yeah,
a child that was being petulant.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was
Throwing
really
a
worked.
tantrum.
Hey,
Yeah.
so we started the conversation by that comparison between the bikes
Hmm.
and the water,
Hmm.
but of course the huge visual comparison is when Ares has to go into the
Yeah.
retro world of
Yeah.
Tron, and
Yeah.
again, that's just I guess the third part of that
Hmm.
issue, which is basically now I need to make it look like old tech, but not
Yeah.
look like it's that you ran out of money for the effects because
No,
that's all you
exactly
could do.
right. Exactly right. I would say it was probably one of the most rewarding, but also challenging look development processes on the film. And it's funny because it's challenging in a different way. Often in visual effects, when you talk about something being challenging, you think in terms of like the water sim, like, oh, that was this big water sim, or there was this like, oh, that took 4 days to render, or you tend to think of like big, 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 big. And this one was an interesting challenge in that I often called it VFX haiku. It was like, no, the challenge is like in stripping it down. The challenge is pulling stuff away and knowing what to pull away and still keep the core, of what's underneath.
I don't know if you did this, but it felt like you reduced the dynamic range tremendously, which I thought was a clever move.
We did a lot. So we did a pretty deep dive looking at the original film, and the original film it's phenomenal, obviously, but it
Yeah, yeah.
also, what's interesting is, you know it there's not just one look to it. So we'd actually, there's the look kind of differs from certain shots based on how they shot it. And, so there was this kind of like having to pick our, like, okay, these are our shots that we're going to use as our North Star here. But it was, I'm very familiar with the film, and it was funny, even just as you go to like truly try to dissect something, these realizations of like, oh, examples would be frozen grain. The backgrounds had frozen grain in them. you know um there's no depth of field in the backgrounds in the original
Yeah.
Tron. Like, it's just going down these list of things. Oh, the light lines on the suit kind of have this like jittery roto edge to them. There's a slight flicker on the faces. There's the obvious black and white on the faces. There's all the, so we just went down this list, and kind of for each of those we just did our experiment. We said, okay, well, where on this like spectrum of like, modern day, cameras and renders and all that, and then the 1982, where do we want to be on that spectrum? And like for the faces, we heavily desaturated the faces, but it's not just a straight black and white. Like, when Flynn's sitting there in the purple room, you're still getting like purple light on his face, but his face is still underneath, is still black and white. So it's things like that where it's like we wanted it to feel black and white, but we wanted to add that little bit of integration work that helps bring it a little more, modern.
Yeah. Maybe it's just my memory. It just didn't feel like any of the blacks were really black. And it felt
Yeah.
like
It
it was beautiful. It was like just, it was great. But it was just so funny thinking, okay, there are a whole lot of
yeah,
really interesting technical decisions here. It's a bit like when
absolutely.
music underscores a shot and it's like makes the shot work, but you're not listening to the music, right?
Yeah.
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 And I felt like you guys must have done quite a lot of that because there just
Wait,
seemed to be lots of subtlety.
yeah, there a lot of work there in trying to find that balance, and exactly right. It's funny. We had a whole like our normal like comp quality control process. When comps come in and we go through and we check all the things, I had to like tell that team. I was like, okay, the sequence is going to come in, and flags are going to go up. It's like it's going to look broken because
Yeah.
it, by modern standards, like, we're introducing things that would be considered broken, but we're doing it intentionally because we're trying to find that balance. But yeah, we called it a 1982 plus, right? Like, we wanted it to feel like it's, the fans of 1982 Tron will look at it and immediately go, yep, I know what that is. But someone not as familiar with it would hopefully still understand. There's enough dialogue and leading up to it where they're talking about going into an older computer, that it's like not just immediately too foreign to them, that there's some polish to that.
Because I mean, famously, to get the original finished, they use traditional animation.
Mhm.
So you're effectively doing computer animation that's simulating both computer animation and an actual animation.
Yeah, it was yeah, it was a very, like I said, it was a challenge, but it was kind of a fun challenge
Oh
of,
yeah.
like, literally we were introducing bad roto. Like, things like that, where it was like, okay, well, what if we took our clean roto and then we ran a noise through it, and like things like that, where like we're intentionally, what if we took a grain and like we still have grain, but we freeze a grain, like what if we kiss that in, like it was though, a handful of those things that, and some things went too far.
Did you just shoot that on like normal blue
Yeah,
screen
we
or
just shot
something?
that normal. Yeah, we just shot that with the Raptors, and on blue screen. Yeah, it was, you know how far we were going to go to match the original was something that wasn't we fully bought into by the when we shot the film. You know, because it's one of those things where it's really hard to do until you've seen the final product, and getting buy-in from not just the filmmakers but the studio and everyone on up to like, because it's kind of an odd thing to be able to say, hey, look, we're going to make these characters black and white and very contrasty and like all these kind of things. So it was shot very traditionally.
Because the other big difference between this and the original is you were doing a what 4.5K like
Yeah,
5K finish for an
yeah,
IMAX projection, which was
yeah.
way above the resolution they ever did the
Oh,
original.
yeah. We never played with. That's interesting. We never played with down resing it so it feels softer. It's still at the 4K crispness, but uh, yeah, no, it was literally it was just we would try something and we go, oh, too far, back up. Like we'd try something else back. You know, like we tried the no depth of field. We tried keeping the backgrounds crisp and everything. Like we're just like, let's see what this looks like, and we did. You know, we'd have our handful of shots we tested on, and certain ones it looked really cool, but then other ones it started to break your brain a little bit, and it was like, okay, it's too much. Like, so you know, it's an example of like there's times when we're like, okay, we're gonna really embrace it and go with it, and other times we're like, oh, that's not
So
working.
my last guess, and this is just purely a guess, is it felt to me like you took an attitude almost like an establishing shot, in that when we first went into the world, it felt, now maybe I just got accustomed to it, but it
Mm,
felt very, oh wow, how fun, this is
mm,
Tron that we know. By the end, when there's dialogue and it's emotionally like significant
mhm.
plot wise, it felt like you'd kind of wound out some of that, so it was a bit more normal. Is that right, or was it like this
No, I
constant kind
think
of thing all the way through?
that wasn't a conscious decision. I'd say maybe what's adding to that is um, towards the end, we have two elements. We have our bonfire, which is this fire that they're standing next to that Flynn grabs the permanence code out of. That was
Yeah,
a big challenge because we needed to make fire but make it feel older. So basically it's a little flashier than you would have seen in the original Tron, and the final
sure.
portal that they go into, I think similarly, like we really kind of dialed it up as far as the so those two elements are probably flashier than you would have seen in the original film, you know, but the environment and everything was, you know, we were trying to keep as much to the same aesthetic that we had defined.
Because Flynn had a transparency that, like a ghost property.
Yeah, that was something that we explored with as well, based on like we are trying to walk this line of, you know, there's some dialogue that supports it where Flynn's basically saying, well, what does he say? I'm a projection that I'm here because you've come here, or so, you know,
Yeah, I'm
there's
here
this
because you're
level.
here kind of thing. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we're we were walking it. We did this kind of ghost in the machine idea is what we're going with. Is when we just gave him the normal treatment, he just looked like, and it started to open up too many questions of like, well, wait a second, is that Flynn? Is
Right.
that a copy of Flynn? And so it was just this like wanting to have something that gave you a little bit of that ghost in the machine, had some of that like 80, like there's a moray pattern, an intentional kind of video pattern moray kind of playing through him, you know, that we're playing with those ideas that he feels like he's a projection. So that again, not to detract from his performance, but still just to let you know that he's not fully realized there. And then at the very end, both at bookends, like you see him form, like as he's walking in, he's being made, and then as Ares is going out, you can see him start to uh, uh, recede.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it must have been a heck of a lot of fun for the compositors to be
Yeah.
playing with that stuff. But it actually really deserves to be seen on a big screen, because a lot of this subtlety that we're talking about, including like the grid water and stuff we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier, like you need fidelity. You need a
Oh
decent
yeah.
screen to see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
Absolutely.
think there's some really great challenges that you tackled in this, and thanks so much for taking time to walk through them with
Oh.
us. I really fascinated by it.
Oh well. Thanks for great questions, and happy to talk it through. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David, for taking time to chat with us. A really fun conversation. Now, I got to admit, I'm a huge fan of the Tron series, and for many people my generation, Star Wars was inspiration for entering the emerging field of VFX at the time. It was for me as well, but the original Tron film in '82 really inspired me, especially the emerging computer graphics in the film. I still remember being amazed by the Evans and Sutherland systems, which are used by Abel's associates, as well as the cool animation work by Magi Cintavision. It really, honestly, blew me away and got me interested in the field. And as a side note, also made it to the Indiana District Finals of the Tron Arcade Game Tournament. The grand prize was one of the arcade games as well as a Commodore computer, but sadly, I had to wait a bit longer for my first computer. Hashtag fanboy. Well, that's it for this episode. For Mike Seymour, I'm John Montgomery. Thanks for listening to this FX podcast.